All right, good evening. I would like to call a special meeting of the City Council to order. City Clerk, roll call, please.
Councilmember Sarno,
Here.
Councilmember Trujillo, Councilmember Zamora,
Here.
Mayor Pro
Oops.
Tem Rodriguez, here. And Mayor Mora.
Here,
Thank you.
and here. Thank you. Okay, public comments are now open. Anyone joining us through Zoom can use the raise hand function if you wish to make a public comment on any item on the agenda. The city clerk will see if you have raised your hand through the Zoom application. For those here to make a public comment in person, you'll have the opportunity once the city clerk announces your name. You will have 3 minutes to speak. City clerk, do we have any members present that wish to speak today?
Mr. Mayor, we don't have any public speakers today.
Thank you. I will now close public comments. Okay, item number 4. General plan update presentation. I'd like to call Director of Planning, Wayne Morrell.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. Today we have the general plan study session. I do have Laura Stetson and Jose Rodriguez. They are consultants that have been hired to update our general plan, and they will do the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Jose Rodriguez, and I'm Project Manager with MIG, and I'm also here with my colleague Laura Stetson, Principal at MIG. And we have been, over the past 18 months, preparing and working on the general plan. And so we're here tonight to kind of give you a status on where we're at, and actually a lot of good news in terms of where we're at with the project and moving forward. So I want to go through our agenda, talk about just real briefly the general plan process, how we've gotten to this point, and then some next steps. And then we'll open it up for question and comments. All right, so the general plan process. We started about a year ago in March of 2020, so a little over a year ago. And we started off with a kickoff meeting with city staff, a tour of the city, and then we immediately started our public engagement process. And so if you recall, we did interviews with the city council members. I think I've spoken with all of you. And then we had opened up our engagement process with focus meetings, stakeholder interviews. We did workshops. We had a community survey. We printed out surveys and handed out to the senior housing community. And that was recommended by one of the city council members. And that's still been ongoing. Our engagement has been ongoing. If you recall, I was back here in May. We gave us an update, but we're doing another workshop, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but we're having an in-person community workshop on November 17th. And I have a slide that'll have more information, but city staff is working to get the word out. But we're excited to have our first in-person workshop. About a year ago, we started our existing conditions report. We have an extensive background report that's available on the project website, and it gives really a good foundation of where the city is currently at as of 2020, 2021. About a year ago, we've developed, with having the first workshop, having some engagement, we started to draft our vision statement. We prepared guiding principles, and around November of 2020 and December, we came back to the city council and presented our draft vision statement. Actually, we also did the land use alternatives. We had different alternatives for different areas and where we would think new growth would occur. We met with city staff. We did charrettes. We presented the alternatives to our general plan advisory group, and we've been meeting with them as well. They came up with a proposal or suggestions for alternatives. We presented it to the planning commission, and then it came to city council for the city council to affirm a draft land use plan. And that was, I believe, in December of 2020, so about a year ago. And that's what kickstarted our land use element, the general plan, but also the environmental impact report that I'll get into in a little bit as well. Just really, these are all of the engagement, kind of a rundown of the engagement activities that we've done. We have a project website. We've done a lot of social media, prepared fact sheets, flyers. I know city staff has prepared and put up banners across major intersections to, again, showcase different engagement activities that were ongoing. We did interviews and focus groups. We've met with the General Plan Advisory Group, which was about 15 members of the community. We have people from the Chamber of Commerce. We have several principals, business owners. I know there was a couple students that started at the beginning, but we've introduced many of the materials, land use planning, the land use plan, and they've been engaged with us in providing good feedback and really understanding, making sure that we understand Santa Fe Springs and that some of the policies and the land use plan reflect the city and the community. We've done 3 community workshops, but of course, during the pandemic, they've all been done virtually through Zoom meetings. But like I said, for November 17, we're excited to at least do 1 meeting in person. We had a community survey that was both on paper and online. And then we had several planning commission and city council study sessions. And like I said, I was back here in May and we gave you an update on the general plan. The next step now is going through public hearings. However, before we go to public hearings tomorrow, before I go to this next slide, I want to say tomorrow, the draft general plan and the environmental impact report will be available for public review. So it'll be on the project website, and then the kickstart of the environmental review of the general plan. There's a 45-day review period, and that'll kickstart tomorrow too. So we're excited that the general plan is finally going to be unveiled and released to the public. Going back to the general plan process, let me just go through some of the kind of technical components of the process. One of the key things on the general plan was identifying additional housing sites. The state has selected, or through other methods, identified Santa Fe Springs needing to provide an additional 952 housing units over the next 8 years. And as you know, many cities in California are going through the housing element update, particularly in the SCAG region. Housing elements are due during this period between now and the end of the year. Technically, by February 11th, there's a little bit of a grace period to adopt and certify the housing elements. So through the general plan program, we worked really hard to identify where can we put new housing in Santa Fe Springs. You're a built-out community, primarily industrial, commercial, and businesses in the city. So we worked really hard in doing analysis. Where are the services located in the city? Where there's a lot of businesses? Where are the high employment businesses at? Where's contamination at? Oil wells, truck and vehicle traffic. There's a complete analysis to identify which sites make sense for housing. And that's all been added when we did look at the land use plan. We identified certain sites for housing. And the two key sites that we really looked at were where existing and future rail stations are planned. So obviously you have an existing Metrolink station. We looked at housing opportunities within walking distance of the Metrolink station. You have a future planned L-line extension, or the East Side light rail station by Metro that's looking at a station at Washington and Norwalk, and planned to be completed by 2028 for the Olympics. We'll see if that schedule still stays. However, we looked at housing opportunities there as well. And not only just to put in housing, but to create what's called transit-oriented communities, where we mix commercial, residential, but create friendly street environments that are walkable for transit, for bike users, but also vehicles as well. So we've created 2 transit-oriented communities within Santa Fe Springs through the land use plan to accommodate, again, mixed-use development and some housing opportunities. As we identified sites, we also have done some economic analysis. There was a market study that was done. Part of looking at housing sites, we had an economic team look at the feasibility of certain sites to accommodate new housing. And most of those sites, based on that analysis, were identified as housing could be accommodated. So we use that analysis to further justify to the state and the Housing and Community Development Department to show that housing within certain sites can definitely be built in Santa Fe Springs. The housing element, that's also part of the general plan. There's a lot of analysis that needs to be done to show the state that the city can accommodate the 952 housing units in Santa Fe Springs. And if you haven't seen the housing element, it is public, that document is available now. It's on the project website and you can download and take a look at the housing element now. That housing element's on a different cycle. It'll be part of the general plan and it'll be adopted with a general plan, but it needed to be sent up to the state for review and certification. Another economic study that we had an economist do was called the cluster study. And the cluster study does is analyze looking at all the existing businesses in Santa Fe Springs and what clusters, what type of commonality between the businesses are common, and what type of clusters potentially the city should be targeting in the future. More manufacturing, more, not only just the manufacturing, but the certain types of businesses, paper manufacturing type businesses, packaging businesses. So there's a cluster study that's available. We'll check with staff. It's something that we haven't put on the website yet, but I'll check with staff and put that up so that the public can take a look at that cluster study. Another major document that the consultant team has put together is the environmental impact report. And as we prepare a land use plan, we have to look at the impacts to those land uses, the growth. Does it affect the schools? Does it affect infrastructure, traffic, greenhouse gases? That document is going to be available tomorrow. There's specific requirements when an environmental impact report is prepared, when it's public, when it's available by the public, and then comments that are made by surrounding agencies, different cities, and so forth. So that public review starts tomorrow for 45 days, and it'll end in December. Part of the analysis for the EIR is traffic analysis, noise analysis, and greenhouse gas and energy analysis. How much, with the new growth, how much impacts in terms of additional greenhouse gases are vehicles causing, or is it not, or if we're looking at mixed use development and more walking, how does that affect the overall impact to greenhouse gases as well? As I mentioned, the draft general plan is going to be released tomorrow, so we're excited about that. The housing element, it's already up, and that's been sent up to the Housing and Community Development Department. They have provided comments, and we're working to address those comments. The public review draft environmental impact report, again, will start tomorrow. There's a 45-day review period. And as I mentioned, November 17th is a community workshop, really to present the draft general plan to the public. We'll have documents available, we'll have stations, we'll show the different changes and the policies kind of in a more public, in a more easier digestible format. We'll take all the big ideas, have stations. We're going to do it at the town center, and really to introduce the general plan to the public and allow the city staff and consultants to ask any questions or comments that the public might have.
I got a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
The public review draft, the 45-day review period. Now, what is the review period? Can you be a little bit more consistent on what does it mean, the 45 days? If nobody complains or nobody says
No. Yeah, no, great. Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's actually a state law requirement for environmental impact reports, and that's specifically for the EIR. And basically what that does is we put in the newspaper, we send the EIR to the surrounding agencies, those that commented on that when we said we're going to prepare an EIR. Are you interested in what particular topic areas or impacts do you foresee? We send the document out and say we're going to have this document available for 45 days, and then you can provide comments to them. They can provide comments by letters, by emails, and then those that are provided within that public review period, our consultant team has to respond to those comments after that 45-day period is over.
So if after the 45 days, then it doesn't comply anymore?
So yeah, the 45-day is the legal limit that we open up the EIR for public review, for public scrutiny. It's going to go to, state agencies, local agencies, the AQMD district, locals, the cities that are adjacent to us, so they can see what are the impacts to, that the general plan is creating to the environment, to the adjacent communities, to the region, if there's any, what mitigation measures are looking to reduce those impacts. So they can write and say, they can write specific comments to the EIR. Comments can still come in after the 45-day review period. City staff can look at them to determine if there's something there that needs to be addressed, but legally, the ones that are within the 45-day period, that's why we make sure that we let the public know that there's a 45-day review period. You want to submit comments, do it in that period. By law, the consultant team and the city has to respond to those specific comments. And they have to respond specifically that are in the EIR. If it's specific to the EIR, now if they want to provide comments that are maybe to the general plan, or it's not related to environmental impacts, obviously we can look at that and maybe make adjustments to the general plan or consider those comments.
One of my biggest concerns would be because of the holidays right now.
Sure.
There's, the reality of people really paying attention to, everybody starts going on relax mode starting right after Thanksgiving, and how much work is really being consistently done, and to give the people enough time to be able to react to something, not being on a holiday, they might travel, they might do all these other things now. So I just, something I'm a little.
Sure. No, I hear that comment there in terms of, with the holidays coming up, not only just Thanksgiving, but Christmas as well. And so the challenge is, when do we release that? We're also, as we're coming in towards the holidays, but also the February due date for the housing element is coming up in early February. So we do have to get it out as soon as possible. But we're hopefully early in November, starting tomorrow, gives us a couple weeks, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. And obviously, hopefully the Thanksgiving break, those that have some time off might have a chance to take a look at the document as well. And then I think it still goes into December, at least the first week in December. However, we'll still be getting the first public hearing that we're looking to have an adoption with the planning commission will be in January. So we'll be, from now and all the way to January, we definitely want comments on the general plan itself. So that's why we're releasing it tomorrow with the EIR. And so we'll definitely have at least several months to have comments on the general plan itself. And that's where we want to do that workshop, to make sure we let the community know the general plan is out there. This is the time to provide comments to the general plan.
I have a question. So we're gonna have the comments and concerns. Do us as council get to see what those comments and concerns are from our residents, or is that only to you?
No. Well, a couple things. One, once we get the public general plan out, we kind of hold it in place, meaning we're not gonna continually make changes as comments come in. We will present all of the changes we make to the general plan to the planning commission and city council and say, look, these are the comments we've got from the workshop. Even if they're indirectly addressed in the EIR, they provided a comment on the EIR, but really affects the general plan, or public comments that we hear afterwards. If there are comments that we look at and we work with city staff and we feel like, that's a change we should make, we will present those changes to the city, to the planning commission first. And if they make any changes, they'll recommend changes to the city council. So any changes we make, we will definitely look at that. And then when we do the workshop, we will have summaries of the workshop, all the comments we get. We're looking for a really robust comment process, to both digitally and on paper, to get as many comments as we can. And we'll definitely look through the comments. If you go to the website, you'll see all of the workshops, the general plan advisory groups, they all have summaries, what the comments we receive. There's a summary on the survey. So there's a summary of all the comments we receive. So we'll definitely have that same process, but we won't make changes or slip them in right after a public review period. Any changes we make, the city council and the planning commission will be aware of those. All right, so the public hearings, the public hearings will start we're looking for January and early February. We will have a public hearing that'll go with the Planning Commission, mostly to solicit the comments from the EIR, and that there's a public hearing that will make sure that if any public comments that do come in, there's a Planning Commission meeting to accept those comments. And that's during the 45-day review period. So there will be a public hearing, not a formal hearing to make any adoptions or recommendations, but to definitely listen to or accept any comments that come in. The elements themselves, when I came back in May, I think we had all of these elements minus the economic development element. So we have land use, housing, circulation, open space and conservation, safety, environmental justice, and noise. But city staff felt like economic development is definitely important to include. So we worked really hard to use some savings that we had in our budget with doing a lot of meetings online, and we're able to help prepare an economic development element. So that will be included as part of the general plan. Some of the big ideas in the general plan, again, the housing that I talked about, the 952 housing units. Where do we put those housing units at? As I talked about earlier, the integrating transit-oriented development and communities with transit stations, both new or proposed and existing stations. You have an active transportation plan that was adopted about a year ago, making sure the general plan complements that and integrates some of the recommendations that were in the active transportation plan. And then the key thing of the environmental justice element and what we heard from the community is making sure we protect residential neighborhoods from truck traffic, from noise and pollution, but also recognize that businesses are still important in Santa Fe Springs. And so creating that balance between protecting neighborhoods and economic development. And then a new element will be the environmental justice element along with the economic development element. There we go, new economic development element. A key thing that we heard from engagement is meeting the needs of the community, both residents and the business community. So some of the key components you'll see in the general plan, particularly in the land use element, is creating a new downtown district that'll have public gathering spaces, more restaurants, potentially some nightlife. Those are things that are added into the general plan. Recognizing, yes, there's a need for a grocery store, maybe on the west side of town. How do we do that? The general plan doesn't specifically tell you, but it recognizes the needs of the community. Good park services, maintaining certain facilities. All those are recognized in the general plan. A key thing in the general plan also is making sure they keep up with technology as the city moves into the future. How can we use technology to create more city efficiencies, potentially being more financially sustainable over the long term? And then a state requirement, and that many communities are now facing, particularly those near the hillsides, but also it's going to affect many communities. And I think a little bit we're feeling now with the drought, but addressing climate change and being more resilient. What if there's more droughts in the future? How does the city respond? More power outages? How do we look for what particular vulnerable populations in the community that may need assistance if there's warmer temperatures during the day? So keep in mind, this general plan is meant to be a 20-year plan. So there are some things that we look at currently, but we also have to look long-term over the next 20 years. And so the general plan, when you do look at it, start to look at it tomorrow, think of that too. This general plan is not only for today, but it's also meant to look over the next 20 years. One thing we really wanted to do for the general plan is make it really graphic friendly, lots of photos, maps and tables, and so that make sure that it keeps the interest of the reader and engaging, but also easy to read. So that's one of the things we really pushed in doing with all the elements. I'm just going to briefly go over a few slides on the draft land use plan and some of the key changes. So this map kind of just shows the northern part of the city. It shows kind of the purple area at the very top where we integrated mixed use and where the new transit or the proposed transit station along the east side extension is planned. You can also see there's a lot of purple areas that we've added. That's a new use, but what we're doing is integrating the zoning map that really reflects a lot of light industrial. We've added that light industrial designation to the general plan for consistency. There around Heritage Park is where we've created our downtown district. But keep in mind, the existing uses that are there now can stay there. But over time, if there's certain sites that are become available, we've talked with property owners there, potentially for mixed use and more public gathering spaces, or using some of the underutilized space that's there for not only just public gathering spaces, but for hotels, restaurants, and so forth. We do have some more mixed use along Telegraph. And then as you can see, there are a couple of what's called medium density residential, and we've identified those in some of the existing church. Over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of new housing laws, and this is one of them, is allowing churches flexibility to provide housing.
You're saying to allow a church to add to their,
The church can remain, and they can add if they feel like they have enough parking space. They can't utilize more than, they can't remove more than 50% of their parking lot. It's actually stipulated on state law.
if they sell the property, then all that goes away.
That goes away, right. But
It has to comply to what our ordinances are, correct?
absolutely. And so you'll see, we did, to be fair, we changed all of the churches to a medium density residential. Those churches can stay as long as they want to. But if they feel like they have excess parking areas that could be accommodated for housing in the future, that could be allowed under the zoning and the general plan designation. And again, it's consistent with the state law requirements that apply to churches. And then the southern part of the city, again, we've looked at the zoning code and recognized that the zoning code allows a lot of commercial uses along the I-5 freeway, and we've incorporated that into the general plan. But to emphasize knowing that the I-5 freeway is a regional corridor, it allows more regional serving commercial uses, and so that we emphasize that in the general plan. And then there's the site where the former Vaughn's facility is located. There's currently right now it's industrial use, but we provided some flexibility for that property to have businesses, a business office complex, but also still maintain some industrial uses if they decide to change some of the uses or the businesses that are currently there. The circulation element, again, our goal is to create graphics to show the pedestrian improvements, the bicycle improvements, street improvements, when transit comes into the community. Environmental justice, again, graphics to show what are some of the pollution burdens, what are some of the population characteristics to be mindful that classify certain areas as what's called disadvantaged communities, what the state requirements to address those and how Santa Fe Springs will address those. Open space and conservation element in terms of the park spaces, the community services programs, but also how do we conserve energy, reduce greenhouse gases. The safety element, we talked a little bit earlier about climate change, but also with faults, earthquakes, seismic issues that are known in Southern California, flooding issues associated with the San Gabriel River, the Whittier Dam issues. All those are addressed in policies that provide guidance for city staff on long-term what to be aware of The noise element, again, also being an industrial city, what are some of the challenges? What are the issues? What are things to address, particularly being close to the freeway? There's policies there. And as I mentioned earlier, we created guiding principles and a vision statement. One thing we wanted to do is make sure that the goals and policies that we've written and heard that are used to address some of the community comments is we want to make sure it reflects and complements the guiding principles. So we use a system of icons to show that this particular goal or policy goes back to the guiding principles and vision. So it's meant to be graphic, meant to be easy to use. And so you will see that as through each of the elements when you see it tomorrow, some of the goals and policies and how they go back and reflect the guiding principles and the vision statement. All right, so next steps. So we are having our study session, again, kind of give you an update on where we're at. Tomorrow, the release of the general plan will occur, as well as the environmental impact report. Again, I mentioned November 17th community workshop. And like I said, we're really excited to meet a lot of people face-to-face in a community workshop setting. We are making zoning amendment changes to the zoning code to reflect the land use and housing changes. And so we'll be working really hard. We started drafting the foundation of the zoning code, just amendments to it, to particularly the housing and mixed use that we're adding to the general plan. We want to make sure that there's complementary zoning districts that'll allow that. And again, this is also to make sure that it's consistent with the housing element changes and what the state is looking for, and making sure that the city can accommodate the 952 units, both in the general plan and the zoning. So we'll be, yes.
Really, can we put something like this on our social medias? So the residents know too? Thank you.
Yep, we'll definitely, I can work on that tomorrow and get something to show the next steps. And we do have, I'll make sure I'll update on the web or project website to have a clear, we do have the dates of the next workshops and meetings coming up, but I'll make sure we'll have a clear next steps graphic that show what are the next meetings coming up. December will be I'm sorry, and it's not a city council public hearing. It will be a planning commission public hearing to solicit the EIR comments. The first planning commission adoption hearing we're planning in January, and then moving to a city council adoption in February. So early next year, you'll have the general plan adoption in front of you. And then in February, we'll probably take all the comments that we heard from the planning commission, city council, and finalize the general plan and all the associated documents. One last slide. Again, we're pushing really hard to get the word out for the November 17th community workshop. Like I said, it's at the town center hall. I know city staff is putting that out on social media. We have that on our project website. And we've talked with city staff on various methods to get the community aware of it. Banners, we have flyers that are going out, email blasts. So we're getting the word out, but we have a couple more weeks, and we're hoping this meeting as well. Let people know, let your neighbors, colleagues know about our November 17th workshop. So with that, I will end my presentation and be happy to answer any questions or comments.
I got one for you. I know that the state's mandating, you said 952 units in 8 years. I know they have their requirements versus low income, very low income, moderate. Is that depicted in your report?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you go to the project website in the housing element, I do apologize, it's a long document, but there's a lot of state requirements. If you go to the housing resources chapter, it shows how we meet the 952 units, what sites, and then what income categories those sites apply to. So there's specific requirements by the state. So if it's a lower income housing site, well, let me back up real briefly and talk about that 952 units. The city is not required to build any of those units. What the state requires the city to do is be able to accommodate those units through your land use and zoning documents. So that housing resources shows which sites and then which income requirements that those sites apply to. So for example, the lower income sites have to be at a minimum 30 dwelling units per acre. So that's 3 to 4 story multifamily housing unit. and the site has to be between a half acre and 10 acres. And so all that's stipulated in that particular housing element that's available now. So you can take a look at that now in that document.
And are any of the projects that we have going on right now in consideration of that 952 units?
Absolutely. So any project that has been submitted an application, even if it's not entitled yet, but also any project that is entitled, meaning they've received planning commission or city council approvals. So I know the one of the sites on Lakeland, that site that has, it doesn't even have approval yet, but it has financial approval, or at least some funding approvals or agreements, I should say, not necessarily approvals, but some agreements. Those units are identified because that part of the funding is looking at some lower income or meeting the lower income requirements.
No.
Exactly. So those are identified. So you'll see those are credit sites, and we use that against the RENA to get the RENA lower. We also look at accessory dwelling units that are now required, not necessarily required, but allowed, that are pushed by the state. And I know the city has its new accessory dwelling unit ordinance, so we can tack off some units from there. But then the other sites where we change the land uses, those again tacked up against the, or checked off against the RENA. So you'll see we meet the RENA. We even have a little bit of a buffer because the lower income housing, let's say we identify a site for lower income, but it gets built at market rate. The city has to show that you have remaining units left in the lower income. Otherwise, you have to update the housing element. And I suspect a lot of cities will be updating the housing element, but we do recommend cities, and the state has recommended cities to provide a little bit of buffer. So the event that some of the lower income housing gets built as market rate, you still have some left over to apply for future affordable housing. So that's all outlined specifically in the housing element.
I had a question, excuse
Yes.
me. I wanted to ask the 952 units, you said that we knew the locations of the land. Do we have a list of that that's available for us?
Absolutely. It's in the housing element document. So if you go to Reimagine Santa Fe Springs .org website, you go to the document tab, and you'll see there's the vision statement, there's the draft land use plan that I showed you. You can download that, but then there's a housing element.
And none of these have been built yet. These
Um,
952, we have
we-
to build them within the 8 years.
We were able to take credit for the housing apartments that are currently under construction at the former school property. Since they haven't been occupied and they're within that 8-year period, we can take credit for those. So those are under construction. And so we used some of those units to mark off against the RENA, but the other sites, no housing has been
No
built on those sites. Some of those sites are commercial, kind of old. HCD or the state really wants to make sure that any of the housing sites that are designated for the lower income, that there is substantial evidence to show that the property that we've selected can actually be available to be built for housing over the next 8 years. So obviously vacant sites is the best site, but you don't have any vacant sites. So we had to look at what's called underutilized sites. And underutilized sites are those that have existing businesses or commercial uses or offices or industrial uses. So we did identify those, particularly within those transit areas. And we looked at the building age. We looked at what's called the building to land value ratio. We take the assessor data, we look at what the land value is, what the building value is, and do a ratio. If it's an old building and it hasn't been updated in a while, the ratio is really low. We select those sites, meaning they're ripe for redevelopment. We're not picking anything that has new construction because HCD will deny those sites. We're looking at sites that have, they don't have a lot of leases or their leases are expiring. We have to do that research to show that those buildings will be available over the next 8 years. And that's specific criteria by state law for the housing element. So you'll see on the housing element, on the housing resources section, we have the tables, we have the map that shows the specific sites of which housing. But then the state also asks us to make sure we look at what's the resources that are available in those areas, particularly where you're putting the lower income sites and what type of resources are available. The state wants to make sure you're not putting all of the lower income housing or targeted for lower income households in the areas that have the least amount of resources. When I say resources, I mean the education attainment within that area, the jobs that are available in the area, the income, and then they look at the environmental pollution with the Cal Enviro screen with environmental justice. They look at all that takes into account, and that's all that in that chapter.
Yeah,
We
that's
show
what I
that
wanted to ask about. How do you determine where the low and the moderate is going to be? So it's all in that area.
it's in that chapter, and the state really identifies the criteria for that. So as I mentioned earlier, you can't say that single family homes at a density of 8 dwelling units per acre or neighborhood can be used for lower income. It has to be a minimum, I'm sorry, most cities have to have a minimum of 30 dwelling units per acre. Santa Fe Springs, because you have a low population, the default density is different. Yours actually at a 20 dwelling units per acre. So the site has to be 20 dwelling units per acre allowed by the zoning and general plan. And it has to be the property site size has to be between a half acre and 10 acres. And then it has all that substantial evidence in terms of if that property could be built over the next 8 years.
But is that single family residence, R3, or multi-family? How is that like?
It has to be some sort of allow multifamily development at the higher density. So what the state is recognizing is that affordable housing is primarily going to be provided in a multifamily housing structure. Unless if it's like a Habitat for Humanity house where it's a smaller unit or could be a duplex, but that there's financial subsidies that are applied and there's, that they're recorded at the covenant and they provide long-term affordable housing. But if there's not, the state is looking for the more higher density. So for Santa Fe Springs, the minimum density is 20 dwelling units per acre. And that could be kind of a townhome development. It could be a multifamily condominium or apartment, like the Miro apartments that are right down the street, or the townhome development. That qualifies as 20 dwelling units per acre. Welcome.
Excuse me, was there any standards for the future of how things, not just zone, but how they look with regards to saying building materials or styles, or in our industrial areas where we have high truck uses, that they have to have walls that cover the height of the trucks?
So when we're preparing general plans, the first word that comes in there is general. So it is a 300-page plus document, and it requires to meet certain elements, safety, housing, transportation, and it provides policy over the long term. Now, there is policies that specific say, hey, you need to create design guidelines for this, for housing, for multifamily housing, design guidelines have to be adjusted. And there's also, again, a lot of state requirements for what's called objective design standards that need to be created. There's policies that say for the I-Freeway corridor that there's more more signage and landscaping and design treatments to help recognize that you're going through Santa Fe Springs. Telegraph Corridor has some policies on again looking at the landscaping, but there's not a lot of specifics, because you want to do that in a more specific document, whether it's design guidelines or a specific plan, because those plans are meant to be from 5 to 10 years, a more shorter time frame. If you put that detail in a general plan, it gets outdated in 10 years from now. So there is direction to provide some of that detail, but it's done through a different document. Does that make sense? All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Okay, if we don't have any more questions, I would like to adjourn this special meeting at 5:49. Thank you, everybody.